One of the sweetest faces of Hollywood and the poster child for the good girl trope was Sandra Dee. She was the all-American blonde whose shy eyes and dainty movements won the hearts of many. Yet behind her good girl persona lay some dark secrets. Sandra Dee went through hell and back, not just in Hollywood, but by her own mother and stepfather. This is a pretty disturbing and shocking story, so consider this a trigger warning for those who need it. And in today's video, we will hear from Sandra Dee herself on her victorious testimony of survival and strength. We will get into her childhood, beauty secrets, career, scandals, and more. But first, hey friend, welcome to my channel, Queen Alud, where we deep dive and break down the most iconic stars through history. If you're not yet subscribed, please be sure to do so. And if you're already subscribed, please turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. Now, without further ado, let's get into this video. For you to know just how much of the good girl she was and the trope that embodies her, if you've ever watched Grease and you remember where they're like, hey, look at me, I'm Sandra Dee.
This goody two-shoes makes me want to barf. Look at me, I'm Sandra Dee. Go to bed till I'm legally wed. I can't, I'm Sandra Dee.
Yeah, they were making fun of Sandy because she was such a good girl, and that's how much Sandra Dee was known as the good girl of Hollywood, that even in movies and pop culture in the era after her, they made fun of good girls by calling them Sandra Dee. So Sandra Dee's real life story has all the makings of a Hollywood drama, starting from the day she was born. She was born Alexandra Zuck, later known as Sandra, made her entrance into the world on April 23rd, 1942 in Bayonne, New Jersey. According to her son, Sandra was actually born in 1944, but she and her mother, Mary, lied about her age, adding 2 extra years to make her seem older for modeling and acting opportunities. Because why not solve your problems with a little creative math? Sandra was the only child of John and Mary Zuck, a couple who met at a dance at a Russian Orthodox church and tied the knot straight after. Unfortunately, their marriage barely lasted longer than their wedding vows, and they were divorced before Sandra turned 5. Her early years weren't just complicated, they were downright bizarre, thanks to her peculiar mother. Mary took one look at Sandra and realized she had a stunningly beautiful daughter, and instead of, just enjoying her child, Mary turned her into a living doll. Mary would constantly dress Sandra up in ridiculously adorable outfits like she was about to hit the runway at any moment. But it didn't stop there. Mary was oddly attached to her baby girl, so attached that she insisted on spoon-feeding Sandra until she was 6 years old. And when school became a thing, you might think Sandra would get some freedom. Nope, Mary would keep her home from school, use the old "it's raining outside" excuse even when the sun was shining, and then draw the curtains shut and forbid Sandra from looking outside to verify if it were actually raining or not. By the time she was 12, Sandra's life took an unexpected turn, right onto Park Avenue in New York City. Producer Ross Hunter claimed he discovered Sandra walking with Mary and immediately saw star potential. And well, he wasn't wrong. Sandra was launched into modeling and eventually acting, surrounded by adults who treated her like she belonged in their world. According to Sandra herself, she grew up fast, mingling with older peoples constantly and doing basically whatever she wanted. Sandra Dee's childhood wasn't just unconventional, it was jaw-dropping in all the wrong ways. At just 5 years old, her life took a turn when her mother Mary began a romance with Eugene Duvon, a suave New York real estate mogul. You'd think a new stepfather might finally give her mother, her creepy mother, something to obsess over instead of Sandra, but no. It only made things worse. When her mother and new stepfather went on their honeymoon, who else tagged along? Sandra. She even slept right between them in the bed and continued to do so well into her teenage years. And her stepfather? He apparently thought the arrangement was perfectly normal, famously saying, "I'm marrying both Mary and Sandra." Now she had 2 adults obsessed with her, but it got worse. While her stepfather got a little too comfortable at night and began to fondle Sandra as her mother lay sleeping next to her. Of course, it got worse and worse every night until finally her stepfather moved on to the next step, which was to force himself on her. But poor Dee, she didn't know at the time they were doing anything wrong. She knew not to tell her mother, but she also thought it was how her stepfather was showing her affection. By night, he was having his way with her, but by day, he was the doting stepfather who spoiled Dee and shouted showered her with love. Dee claimed her mother did eventually know, but acted blind to the whole situation, which further made Dee feel like what was happening was natural. She didn't realize it was all wrong until she got much older and it began to traumatize her. At one point, she finally confronted her mother about the SA by her stepfather, as well as her mother's obliviousness to it. She said, and I quote, "One night I couldn't control the pressure any longer. My mother and I were at home with a few of her close friends, and she started eulogizing my stepfather. I was slowly getting more and more irate. Finally, I said, 'Mom, shut up. A saint he wasn't.' My mother started defending him, and I said, 'Well, guess what your saint did to me? He had sex with me.' My mother was shocked, then angry. I knew I hurt her. I wanted to. I had so much anger towards her for not doing something to help me, but she ignored me, and the subject never came up again. I realize now that my mother erased the situation from her own mind. It didn't exist, so she didn't have to feel guilty." End quote.
There are people who hear you say, I don't know how to shop, I don't know how to write a check, but they weren't around. And maybe they don't understand a lot about that era too. Take me back to the little girl.
My mother married a second time, and my dad's business.
How old were you?
When she married, I was 8. When she started the business with him, or seeing him, let's say, I was 5. Because he traveled a lot. And so I was not in school. I had tutors. We landed in New York, and this was going to be like a year or something. We knew we'd be there. So he enrolled me in professional children's school. And
Go back with the father-in-law, because this will be very hard for you to talk about, but we have a problem in America about this.
I lived 20 years with this on my shoulder, the lies. And I was so afraid of hurting family, of hurting, my friends would think, what would they think of me? I mean, I was guilty of something that I didn't even know what was happening, because it did start from age, people say 8. No, it started from 5. 5. I was molested.
What did he do?
He would always call me to come into bed and snuggle. Snuggling became more than that. And it's really strange because, and this is hard for me, because I always woke up in my own bed in the morning, and everything was normal in the morning. I mean, my dad would say good morning, and my mom, and I would sit there thinking, did this happen? I mean, at my age, I mean, could I imagine this? But I would put it in the back of my mind. It's the strangest thing. And I'm a 5-year-old kid. I mean, I'm a baby, and I am sleeping between my mother and my father, including their honeymoon.
You slept in their bed?
In the middle, in their bed. And my father at the time would say, "I'm not marrying your mother. I'm marrying both of you." And everybody thought that was so endearing. And, and I have to say this, and this is really going to sound maybe gross or sick to people, but I could block it out in the morning to the fact that I really adored this man during the day. And at night it was some kind of, I cannot explain, because I never did understand it until after I married.
Did you tell your mother? Your mother was in the same bed. I mean, did you say something? Mother, this man is fondling me. This man is touching me.
No.
But she knew.
Oh, I at that time thought no, but after from 5 to 11, 6 years, you'd have to be dumb and blind not to know. And I don't blame my mother. Don't get me wrong about this. My mother worshipped this man, and I think she was afraid maybe he would stray. And I sort of kept him at home. She married my dad. She attached herself to his business. And I was on my own in New York. I mean, at 8, 9, and 10, I was going on subways, modeling till 11 at night. I mean, they trusted me. I came home. In other words, I was fine. No one was doting over me. But when my dad died, she lost this hold that she had on him, and it became on me. And then when we came out here, we discovered that you have to be on the set if you're a minor with your guardian. So my mother could go nowhere but on the set, and she adored it. She would sit with the crew. She would eat donuts. She would do everything for me. I mean, and there were people to do it. And I was almost sometimes embarrassed that my mother would be running up with a Kleenex. She was my mother. And I'd say, "I need a Kleenex." And I was embarrassed that she would be up to do that. It's almost like she was the maid. And
I understand.
It was hard. And I couldn't hurt her feelings. I couldn't, because I needed to run the set. I couldn't work. And she gloried in it. She really did.
But let's jump to her career and other ways her mother Mary exploited her. Mary wasted no time putting Sandra's beauty to work. By 8 years old, Sandra was modeling, but this wasn't your typical after-school hobby. By the time she turned 11, Sandra was a full-blown modeling sensation and pulling an eye-popping $80,000 a year, which was a lot during those days, probably equivalent to like $400,000 to $500,000 a year. That's a staggering amount, especially for a kid who probably hadn't even lost all her baby teeth. But instead of letting Sandra enjoy a slice of independence or even just a normal childhood, Mary cranked up her overbearing antics to dizzying heights. Then puberty hit, and Mary's behavior turned downright horrific. Mortified at the thought of her daughter developing curves, she demanded Sandra bind her chest to keep her looking like a little girl. It wasn't just controlling, it was cruel. Mary's obsession with keeping Sandra prepubescent led to something even darker. Between the relentless pressure of modeling and her mother's extreme demands, Sandra developed a severe ED. Imagine living on nothing but lettuce for an entire year. That's how bad it got. She ate lettuce and salads only for an entire year. Can you imagine? Sandra later admitted she was desperate to become as thin as high fashion models, but her crash diets completely wrecked her. She said, and I quote, "I ruined my skin, hair, nails, everything," she recalled. Things got so bad that Sandra's body literally couldn't digest food anymore. She needed a doctor to help her learn how to eat all over again, effectively saving her life. Looking back, Sandra didn't mince words when she said, "I could have ended my life." Being the family breadwinner while barely out of elementary school was already too much pressure. Pair that with her mother's over-the-top micromanagement, and it's no wonder Sandra's young life teetered dangerously on the edge. But somehow, amid all the madness, Sandra survived. And speaking on her unspeakable diet, let's pivot to some of her other beauty secrets. In a 1957 Lydia Lane article, she talks about clothes and her eating habits into further detail. Brace yourself. She states, and I quote, "I'm careful about my appearance, and when I take off a dress, I look to see if it needs cleaning. I hate to see anyone wear something that is not clean. I wash my hair 3 times a week," she continued. "I got into the habit when I was modeling. Another thing I learned from this type of work is to be conscious of my posture. I think you look so much better in your clothes when you stand upright. My father warned me that I wasn't eating right, but I had never been sick a day in my life, and I didn't pay attention to him. I would rush out of the house without breakfast, grab a piece of fruit or a hard-boiled egg for lunch. This is a foolish way to eat, and I paid for it," Sandra admitted. "I lost my strength and became so anemic that I had to go to the doctor every day for injections. It is bad enough for a grown person not to eat right, but when you are building your body, it is very necessary to have full meals instead of snacks. My skin got dry, nails broke, and even my hair was different when I was in bad health. I still don't have as much energy as I used to have," Sandra confided. "But one thing I've learned, I'll never again take good health for granted, and I'll never neglect to eat properly." Sandra admitted that a young girl looks really quite foolish in too much makeup and clothes that are too tight for her as she's revisiting her own childhood. "They get plenty of advice, but they don't listen," she said. "You have a long time to be grown up, but I suppose no one will listen to my warning any more than I listened when I was in school. What works for a mature body may do harm to an adolescent who is still growing. When I was modeling, I had a foolish idea that I should be as skinny as the high fashion girls. So without saying anything to anyone, I decided to diet. I was a real smart kid who was going to do it on her own. I had it all figured out. I simply would not eat. In the beginning, it took lots of discipline, but after a while, I lost my appetite and also lost lots of weight. One night, I decided to celebrate this accomplishment with a big meal, but I got sick and couldn't hold my dinner. I had starved so long, my body was rejecting food. I could have seriously injured my health. As a result of my foolishness, I was anemic for a long time, and it was a whole year before I had full energy again," end quote. Sandra mentioned that girls in their teens were not the only ones who made mistakes. "I think women who tried to wear baby doll dresses look as ridiculous today as kids who tried to get away with high fashion that was too sophisticated for them. It's great, this young new look. Maybe it'll keep girls from trying to grow old too fast," end quote. Now, in terms in a lighter note, here are some of her favorite things, because I know that was heavy. She loved playing games such as Canasta, Yahtzee, Monopoly, and the board games Clue. She was very smart and would regularly beat everybody in any game that she played. Her second love was reading fiction. She would go to the bookstore and get a 400-page book and devour it in a day or so. She also loved doing the word scramble and the LA Times. She loved two things with a passion. She would make a huge pot of chili with all fresh ingredients once and would load it up with Tabasco sauce. She loved spicy things and would put hot sauce on everything. She also made something called ratatouilles. She also was a big fan of the early food TV channels, and her favorite was Emeril Lagasse. She also loved dancing. She trained at the Debbie Reynolds Dance Studio and learned jazz and other dance forms, and her and Debbie Reynolds were really, really cool. She also danced with Don Cornelius, Soul Train, and other dance troupes in Los Angeles. Her favorite colors were said to be yellow and orange. Leave a yellow and orange heart in the comment section for her. Now, let's get into her career. By the mid-1950s, her mother Mary was determined to turn her daughter into cinema's next big thing. Sandra, barely out of school, was riding the subway alone to auditions, attending a performing arts school alongside young starlets like Tuesday Weld, which I did a video for also, and trying to act far older than her age, though she was only 11. It was all part of Mary's relentless plan to make sure her daughter became Hollywood's golden girl. Sandra landed her first film role. Her big break came in the 1957 drama Until They Sell, where she shared the spotlight with major Hollywood names like Paul Newman and Joan Fontaine. Impressive company, sure, but Sandra's casting also relied on a colossal lie. While the studio was told she was 14 years old, Sandra was actually only 12. And here's the kicker. She was also still physically underdeveloped, that the wardrobe department had to put her in a rubber suit under her costumes to fake curves. Sandra, however, didn't exactly grasp how absurd this all was. Thrilled with her new body, she reportedly ran up to her 32-year-old co-star Paul Newman on set and blurted out, Mr. Newman, want to see my new body?" Innocent enthusiasm, but awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. And she didn't understand boundaries like that, which really did not help her in Hollywood. It really did not help her because of what was happening with her stepfather and her mother allowing it. She didn't really understand boundaries with her adult male stars. So imagine being 12 on set with these grown men. You're wearing bikinis and tight clothes and stuff, and you're more than happy to let them touch you, or, you know, like she did with Paul Newman. Do you want to see my new body? To take off your clothes to show the suit that was underneath you. It was things like that of course you can imagine would put her in a lot of danger, but that was all due to her mom. Her life was a strange mix of childlike wonder, adult expectations, and relentless pressure. While Mary's ambition might have catapulted her daughter into stardom, it also left Sandra struggling to figure out where her childhood ended and her Hollywood career began. That balancing act between heartbreak, ambition, and awkward coming-of-age moments set the tone for Sandra's rise and hinted at the even bigger challenges that lay ahead. After the success of her film Until They Sell, she quickly became America's new sweetheart. Hits like Imitation of Life and her iconic role as a carefree, beachy Gidget solidified her place in Hollywood. Gossip queen Luella Parsons even compared her to a modern Shirley Temple with her angelic, innocent beauty. She is a very gorgeous woman. But behind the polished smile and glamorous image, Sandra's world was far from perfect. Off camera, her personal struggles were mounting. Still battling her ED, Sandra had developed a troubling routine. She'd binge on walnuts every Saturday and then force herself to purge by downing Epsom salts. Yeah, you heard that right. So she'll eat all these walnuts and then drink Epsom salt. You know how dangerous that is? Just so she can throw it all up. It was a dangerous pattern that revealed just how fragile her life was beneath the surface. And it was during this vulnerable time that Sandra's life took a sharp and fateful turn. Her career was thriving when she landed a role in Come September, acting alongside Hollywood heavyweights Rock Hudson and Gina Lolo Brigida, which I did a video for also, and Rock Hudson. But it wasn't her A-list co-stars who would rock her world. Enter Bobby Darin, the charmingly cocky crooner. From the moment Darin laid eyes on the still teenage Sandra, he was smitten, and he made sure everyone, including her, knew it. Bobby Darin did not believe in playing it cool. He wasted no time in proposing marriage to Sandra when they barely knew each other. Sandra, unimpressed with his forwardness, found him conniving and shot him down immediately. You'd think that would deter him. Not a chance. Darin was relentless. When Sandra brushed him off, he resorted to playground antics, teasing her with ridiculous chants like Sandra Dee has a flea. Realizing that Sandra wasn't going to fall for his silly taunts, Darin shifted his focus focus on the ultimate gatekeeper, Sandra's overbearing mother, Mary. Using all his charm, he worked his magic on Mary instead. It worked like a charm too, because soon enough, Mary was on Team Bobby. She even convinced Sandra to go on a romantic carriage ride with him. That fateful ride, Darren poured his heart out. He confessed that his bizarre antics were all because he was terrified of how much he cared for her. And whether it was his charm, his desperation, or just Sandra wanting a moment of romance, it worked. The two of them started a whirlwind romance, sneaking kisses and flirting their way across the set of Come September. Their relationship stirred up all kinds of drama, and Sandra's well-guarded image as a sweet, untouchable star started to crack. But true to her signature style, Sandra dived into the chaos head first. When Sandra Dee and Bobby Darin fell for each other, they didn't waste time. Literally. Before the filming of Come September even wrapped, Sandra dropped a bombshell on her co-stars. She and Bobby Darin had eloped. The news stunned everyone, including her much older co-star Rock Hudson, and even her notoriously controlling mother, Mary. But Sandra, she was blissfully happy. The morning after the wedding, she gushed, "I had never felt so safe in my life as I felt with Bobby," end quote. Sounds like a fairy tale. But not so fast. What Sandra didn't quite realize was the full package that came with her new husband. Bad habits, big ego, and all. Bobby Darin had grown up as a golden child of his family, especially after enduring a serious illness during childhood. His parents pampered him to the point of declaring him the king. Darin? He leaned into the title like it was his birthright. Spoiled doesn't even begin to cover it. The family doted on him so much that even his own sister later admitted it was a mistake. We should have made him into a human being and we didn't do it, end quote. This grand sense of entitlement didn't stop at home. Bobby had a relentless drive to be the biggest star in the room, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing until it spilled over into his personality. His ego grew as fast as his fame, and it didn't just rub strangers the wrong way. Even his fellow celebrities had a hard time stomaching him. Sammy Davis Jr. famously joked, and I quote, he said this to Bobby. He said, "Let me know when you stop being a legend so we can be friends again." Ouch. But if Bobby Darin was hard to deal with in general, he saved his worst behavior for Sandra. Sure, she had fallen head over heels for his charm, but what followed, their whirlwind romance, was anything but smooth sailing. Marrying Bobby meant dealing with a man used to getting whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it, no questions asked. And for the girl who had always been controlled by her mother, stepping into another relationship that was this controlling was like trading one storm for another. Sandra Dee thought she was walking into a fairy tale when she married Bobby, but reality hit her like a bad plot twist. Right after the wedding, it became painfully clear what Bobby expected from his new wife. He wanted her to be his #1 fan, and not just in the emotional sense. Every night, she was expected to show up at his Vegas shows, dressed to perfection, hair flawless, makeup impeccable, just to sit in the front audience and gaze at him adoringly like a trophy on display. It's less about love and more about appearances. The reward for all this devotion? Total neglect. Sandra, always obedient, sat through show after show, only to watch her husband ignore her completely after the curtains closed. Instead of whisking her off for romantic evenings, Bobby would head off with his buddies for drinks and laughs, leaving Sandra to twiddle her thumbs. "He had me sitting through shows, and then he was with the guys every night," Sandra later recalled. The loneliness seeped into her words as she confessed, "I had no life, and we had no life together," end quote. Bored out of her mind, Sandra began to unravel. She started drinking heavily and gambling to pass the time, looking for any thrill to shake up her boring life. But when even that didn't help, she turned to more dramatic measures. Desperate for Bobby's attention, Sandra began playing cruel little tricks on him. Her favorite was messing with his vanity because he was so obsessed with himself. Before Bobby went on stage, she'd gleefully tell him that his toupee was crooked. If that didn't work, Sandra would start crying and causing a scene because, as she put it, to stir things up, "I'm bored." Bobby, however, wasn't much better. He often pushed her buttons just to see her break down in tears. Their relationship quickly turned into a messy back and forth of arguments and stunts. Things hit an all-time low after the birth of their son Dodd in 1961. Instead of bringing them closer together, Dodd's arrival only added to their mistrust and distance. Bobby grew paranoid, convinced Sandra was cheating on him with her Tammy and the Doctor co-star Peter Fonda. Sandra swore up and down that they were just friends, even to her dying day, but Bobby wasn't buying it. Fueled by jealousy, he made his next move, and it was as petty as it was cowardly. One day, Bobby decided to announce their separation, but instead of sitting Sandra down and having an adult conversation, He made someone else deliver the news. If that wasn't heartless enough, the blow left Sandra utterly blindsided. Still, even after such a low blow, the two couldn't seem to fully quit each other. They got back together, allegedly for the sake of their love and their son Dodd, but it didn't last long. By 1966, the marriage was dead for good, ending with another separation, this time permanent. Sandra Dee's life took a sharp downhill turn in the late 1960s, and the golden image she'd worked so hard to maintain started to crumble. Hollywood had moved on, and so had audiences. No longer the fresh-faced ingenue everyone adored, Sandra struggled to find her place in a world that now wanted something different. It didn't take long for Universal, the studio that had banked on her wholesome charm for years, to drop her without ceremony. Just like that, the dream was over. With her career in freefall, Sandra's polished facade began to crack. For years, she'd been the industry's perfect little good girl, burying her private pain under smiles and lace gloves. But in 1967, she lashed out in a rare moment of raw honesty. During an interview with Roger Ebert, while puffing on a cigarette, no less, she delivered a statement dripping in bitterness, saying, and I quote, look at this cigarette. I like to smoke. I'm 25 years old, and it so happens that I like to smoke. So out in Hollywood, the studio press agents are still pulling cigarettes out of my hand and covering my drink with a napkin whenever my picture is taken. Little Sandra Dee isn't supposed to smoke, or drink, or breathe, end quote. It was the sarcastic mic drop no one expected, but hinted at how much she was spiraling. Adding to her struggle was the shadow of her ex-husband Bobby Darin, who managed to make things even messier. Sandra had never truly gotten over Bobby after their split, and unlike her, he didn't seem to have any trouble moving on. While she stayed single, he swiftly married a secretary named Andrea Yeager in 1973, as if to prove how replaceable Sandra had become. But Bobby's life wasn't smooth sailing either. His health, always fragile thanks to a bad heart, worsened dramatically, and in 1971, he underwent surgery to receive 2 artificial valves. Curiously, during every health scare and hospital stay, it wasn't Andrea he turned to for comfort, it was Sandra. Bobby kept coming back, Sandra later said, and always with an illness. Their relationship, already a cocktail of love, pain, and lingering resentment, grew even more complicated. With Bobby's health on shaky ground and the marriage to Andrea falling apart within months, it wasn't long before he and Sandra found themselves stumbling back into each other's arms. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might rekindle what they'd lost, but life had much crueler plans. On December 19, 1973, Bobby Darin entered surgery for yet another heart procedure. It was a grueling 6-hour operation, and doctors did everything they could to save him. They willed him into recovery, but Bobby never woke up. At just 37 years old, he died, leaving Sandra devastated. Despite everything, the ups, the downs, the messy breakups, and the rekindled moments of hope, he had always been the love of her life. His death left her shattered, and the fallout from losing him would haunt her for years to come. Sandra Dee's world fell apart the moment she heard Bobby Darin had died. She was devastated and completely overcome with grief. After Bobby's passing, Sandra spiraled. Her grief was overwhelming and would haunt her for the rest of her life. Even her son admitted years later, my mom never recovered. She tried to move forward, taking on guest roles here and there to keep busy, but her career was clearly heading nowhere. Deep down, Sandra felt like she was a washed-up star. With bitter honesty, she confessed, I feel like a has-been that never was. Ouch. It didn't get much lower than that. By the 1980s, Sandra had pretty much disappeared from Hollywood. She wasn't just retired, she was practically a recluse. Her whole life was now focused on raising Dodd and trying to coexist with her mother, Mary, who still loomed large over everything. Mary was as controlling as ever and made sure Sandra never really broke free, even in adulthood. For Sandra, family was all she had left, but sadly, even that was about to unravel. Towards the end of the decade, Mary was diagnosed with lung cancer, and it became clear her days were numbered. Sandra tried to care for her, but the relationship between mother and daughter had always been tempestuous. When Mary eventually passed, she couldn't resist one final jab. On her literal deathbed, she turned to her grandson Dodd and said, and I quote, "Don't be a victim as I was. Don't waste your life cleaning up after Sandra," end quote. Cruelty of those words wrecked Sandra. Despite all the pain her mother had caused her over the years, Sandra completely unraveled after Mary's death. She seemed to have this thing where she just loved deeply the people who hurt her the most. Sandra Dee's life took a devastating turn after her mother's death, and what little control she had left completely unraveled. Always battling her struggles with eating and drinking, Sandra gave in fully to her vices during this heartbreaking time. She later admitted that her diet consisted only of soup, crackers, and scotch. She grew alarmingly thin, her weight dropping to near skeletal levels as her health spiraled further and further out of control. The wake-up call came in terrifying fashion. Her son Dodd watched helplessly as his mother sank deeper into self-destruction until the day he found her vomiting blood. That was it. Dodd sprang into action, getting her into both mental and physical rehabilitation. His intervention most likely saved her life. Slowly, Sandra began to find her footing again, even daring to talk about returning to acting. For a moment, there seemed to be a flicker of hope that she would rebuild herself. But Sandra's struggles weren't done with her yet. Although she managed to cut back on the drinking, she never gave it up completely. Smoking remained a constant companion as well, and the damage her body endured over decades of self-abuse was by this point impossible to undo. By the time she hit middle age, she was dealt a brutal diagnosis, kidney failure. Years of treating her body badly had finally caught up to her, and she now needed dialysis to survive. While this finally pushed Sandra to quit drinking once and for all, it was too late. Her kidneys were in shambles and her health continued to deteriorate. Despite this, Sandra faced her declining years with as much grace as her battered body would allow. But sadly, her time was running out. On February 20th, 2005, Sandra Dee passed away in a hospital at just 62 years old, a victim of the years of chaos that had surrounded her. For many fans, the news was shocking. They still pictured her as the fresh-faced, beachy beauty that they had fallen in love with in classics like Gidget. But behind that iconic smile had always been a woman battling inner demons, navigating a stormy and tragic life that no Hollywood script could have rivaled. This is all I have for this video. What a beautiful woman to me that, she was able to still love so deeply, even though she was hurt so deeply. Her mother, those last words, ouch, after all that she's been through. And yet she loved her mother so much that she spiraled, and eventually her mother kind of won that battle, because her spiraling after her mother's death is what ultimately led to her own death. Wow, to be able to love like that regardless. And this is a story of so many Hollywood icons, and it's so unfortunate when we look at these people, just to know that a lot of them are in the position they're in due to a lot of trauma. Leave a yellow and orange heart in the comment for her. Comment below who else would you guys like a video for, and if you like the music you're listening to, the link is in the description. I will see you in the next one.